In this lesson, we'll talk about saving files from Maya. So just as with any other application, it's very important that we save our files often. And let's take a look at how we can do that. So simply saving files is very easy. We can go up here to the little disk, and we can hit that to save the scene as it's currently named, or we can hit Control S. Also, the file menu will allow us to do that as well. Save scene, Control S. You can see there are options for saving our scene, so we can come in and choose some different options here. Incremental save we'll look at in a second. Let's go ahead and cancel that out. We can also, if we want to change the name of this file, so for instance, let's say save scene as, that'll leave the original scene alone and allow us to save this scene as a new name. So we can put our name right in here. So maybe call this test_01, and then we can choose a file type. So there are a couple of file types that we can save that are native Maya scenes. There are Maya ASCII files, which are .ma files. There are also Maya binary files, which are .mb files. The difference being the Maya binary file is not really human readable, whereas the Maya ASCII file is. And so often we will save our files as Maya ASCII files, .ma files, just because sometimes things may come up where you have to be able to go in and try to fix something within the file. That doesn't happen very often at all, but it makes things a little bit easier if you have to do that. Actually, you can kind of read the characters of what's going on in there to some degree. So we'll save this as a Maya ASCII file, and we'll just hit Save As. You can see down here, lets us know where it saved that and the name of the file. You can see it appended that .ma to the end of our test01. Now, often when we're working on a kind of project that is a long process, we'll want to save incrementally so that if we end up doing something that doesn't work or we need to go back to an earlier state, it's very easy to go back and open up a file that you saved earlier. So we can do that by going to File, Increment and Save. Also, the hotkey for that is Control-Alt-S. Now you can see that right here, the increment did not work. So let me change something in the file. So I'm just going to move this over and rotate it. Now let's increment and save. And you can see that it's actually created an increment in here where it's taken our file and appended this 001. So then if we go in here and move this around again, increment and save, it's now incrementing that number that it's appended on. Okay, so that's useful. So now, if we didn't like what we did, we can go back to an earlier version. We also have the ability to turn on autosave. So let's go into our preferences and we'll take a look at this. If we look over here on the left-hand side, you can see there's a spot for files and projects. Let's open that up. And then if we come down to the third section, there is a section called autosave. Right now it's turned off, so let's enable that. This will allow us to set an interval so that Maya will automatically save versions of our files as we go, so we don't have to manually go in and save. Sometimes we forget, sometimes we work for a little while, we just kind of get in the flow and get in the zone, and we forget to save, and then something happens and we lose some work possibly. So this autosave will kind of help to minimize that. So right now the interval is set to 10 minutes and it's going to save it in our project. We can also limit the autosaves, and so we can say, okay, only save the last 10 autosaves. So that way you're not saving every single autosave. You can turn that off or on if you like. Okay. You can also set an option here for the file compression, but we'll leave that alone. You can set a specific spot if you want to change that, but we'll just save it in the project and we'll enable that. So now every 10 minutes it's going to save a version of this file in that autosave folder that we looked at. All right, so very important that we save often. The increment and save can help us to increment our files and create a nice history that we can go back in and kind of jump back into different states of our geometry and of our scenes. So the next thing that we'll look at is kind of the viewport shading options and selection mode. So how can we view our geometry in our viewport, and how can we start to select our objects in different ways? So we'll talk about that next.